Hello, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, once again here on another one of our HR on the Offensive Lives. This time we're doing it remotely. So I'm doing it from my office at home, joined by my cat Iago. And Emily Onis, do you have any pets or a son around that will be your mascot for today?
No, my son is at nursery at the moment.
He's at nursery, and so let's focus on our topic for today. What we want to talk about, we're running a campaign. For those of you who are watching this for the first time, we've been running a campaign for a few months now called Demystifying HR's Operating Model. And what I wanted to do today is just grab 10 minutes of Emma's time to talk about the campaign itself, just for a minute or so, but then also to actually talk about a recent blog that we've done, Ems, and you've obviously helped to drive this blog, which was all around different business drivers. But before we get into that, should we sort of set the scene? And if you can just talk for a minute or two about the operating model campaign, what we've done so far, just so that people can find out a little bit more about the campaign on our website, if they haven't already done so.
Sure, very happy to. So it's something that we find super interesting when we work with our clients, this whole topic of what should our HR operating model look like. And as you say, Chris, we've talked about demystifying the HR operating model, and that being the title of the campaign, because is there a kind of one size fits all, a silver bullet, or a typical model that organisations and HR leaders should really be looking for? And I think it's fair to say that at least our perspective at Lace is that there isn't. And there's a number of different reasons for that. And we'll talk a little bit around the business drivers and the business context on this kind of live stream. And that really is at the heart, I guess, of helping answer what the right considerations for your HR operating model should be. But we started the campaign by sort of talking around some of the challenges that we see with our clients when HR operating models aren't perhaps working as effectively as they could do. So silos being one of them, be that around technology silos or just ways of working, disconnect between COEs, business partners and shared services, for example, if you've got an ORIC operating model. And then we looked at what might be out there in the marketplace, because some organisations have done some really good thinking around maybe different considerations for HR operating models. Is there a model that you should be looking to kind of go to? And our clients ask us about that. So we just wanted to, I guess, do a little bit of external research, see what was out there, synthesize to some headlines, and then really turn that into, well, what's our perspective, and helping build on some of that, as looking at all of the good things that are in the marketplace, as much as also our perspective at Lace. And I know we're about to come on to that in a second, Chris.
Yeah, let's get into the nub of our perspective then. We released on Friday of last week, I think it might have been Thursday, our business drivers. And what I'd like you to do is just walk me through each of the four business drivers that we've come up with and why we came up with those, I guess. And then also what we've done, if you haven't already seen it, you can check out a blog that we wrote. It was Kathy, one of our co-founders, wrote around the different hats that a CPO needs to wear. We've also done a live stream on that as well. So if you check the Lace Partners feed that you'll be watching this on, or if you're watching it on YouTube or on Twitter, you can of course go back through the previous sort of archives. But we've written a blog which is around how the CPO from a different type of business, they need to wear four different hats, but at different times they need to wear different types of hats, and the different types of business that they have different types of hats. So let's kick off with the first one, which is around agility. So when we talk about this business driver, Ems, what are we talking about? What's the type of business, and then what's the hat, the predominant hat that the CPO has to wear?
Yeah, very happy to. And maybe just quickly before I do that, we'll also mention some of the 10 traits as well, because that ties into, again, something else that we've spoken about in one of our blogs. So there isn't a one size fits all operating model for HR, because there's not one size fits all business operating model. And I guess the premise of all of the four kind of contexts that we're going to talk about, Chris, very briefly, I know, on this live stream, is that ultimately you have to consider the business context. Business strategy drives people strategy, which then drives how you operationalize the services, the ways of working, and all of those things for HR. So we distilled them down into four. So agility is one of the first ones. We then talk about customer intimacy, rapid growth, and productivity. And from an agility standpoint, there's kind of two different dimensions here. This might be that you're constantly looking to reshape your business, maybe through acquisition, through mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, a lot of change going on. Or perhaps you've got a business objective and imperative to really rapidly respond to the changing competitor landscape. So we're talking about agility in that context here, and therefore lots of peaks and troughs maybe around managing change, business change, for example. So when we think about the 4 hats of the CPO, all 4 hats for all of these business contexts that I'm about to briefly mention are important, but you might need to dial one up more than the others, dependent on the business context. So particularly for this context of agility, really this is around the CPO being the transformation enabler. So that's things such as, have you got really strong capabilities around strategic workforce planning, talent demand, talent planning? What are the people aspects of business transformation that you might need to consider? And specialist capabilities around change, for example. And also in our kind of thinking and the blogs that we posted last week, we tie that back to our 10 traits of leading HR functions as well. So all of these things start to become quite powerful, I guess, as to considerations and context and dynamics to consider. And some of the traits that we talk about, so you can't do all of them, at least you can't do all of them super well. You need to dial some up and pull on some of those levers. So in this context of agility, it might be things such as the trait around business alignment and partnership driven, a change leader, and then also being solution and innovation led. And in the blog, we also, for each of the 4 business contexts, give some consideration questions that CPOs and their HRLT teams might want to be thinking about. So that could be, have you got specialist capabilities today around strategic workforce planning? If you don't, how might you build those? Do you build them? Do you buy them? Do you require them? If you've got a really strong partnership model that helps you future-proof around those peaks and troughs in that acquisitive kind of business context, and also maybe something around alternative talent pools. Could you look at using skills and getting that demand in a different way, for example? So there's lots and lots we cover, but I know we've only got sort of 2 minutes for each of the business contexts. So it's just to whet the appetite, I guess, for some of the things that we are talking about.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the next business driver in a second, the CPO hats and what the traits are that are featured on it. But just as a quick kind of little mini plug, we've got a couple of white papers that we've produced that are linked to the campaign itself. One is around workforce transformation. And of course, Emma was mentioning strategic workforce planning, but just workforce transformation and the impact and what are some of the things that organizations need to be thinking about when looking at that. That was launched right at the beginning of the campaign. And then in April, you yourself was the person that spearheaded our second white paper, which was around HR shared services trends. And if you want to find out more about that, we won't go into the whole detail on that on today's live stream, because Emma and I have done a separate one around the HR shared services trends report for 2024, which we do every 2 years. Check that out. Go onto the Lace Partners website. If you go into the insights section and then look for the demystifying HR operating model campaign, then you can find out about that. But Ems, let's move on to the second of those business drivers. So can you just talk me through customer intimacy, the business driver itself, and then obviously the CPO, predominant CPO hat, and then which of those 10 traits we say are dominant, I guess you would say.
Yeah, sure. Very happy to again. So in this context, you might be in an organization such as hospitality, leisure, where you've got maybe a large frontline workforce, and making sure that employees have the best experience possible is important, because that might translate directly potentially to guest experience. So there's that direct correlation, I guess, is what we're getting at here. And the CPO hat, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the one that's all around being the experience architect. So really understanding what truly drives a very positive and very strong employee experience and employee value proposition, using data and insights to really measure that and continuously improve on that. And then I guess ultimately being experience-led as part of the DNA through everything that is done by the HR function to service the business. So it's perhaps not unsurprising that some of those traits that will be maybe more dialed up in this type of business context when considering the implications for the operating model around process, people and technology are the traits of being employee-centric and experience-rich, being continuously improvement obsessed, because you've got to keep doing things and evolving things and doing them better, but also then using that data and insights, that's another trait, and then supercharging your people managers. Because again, thinking about perhaps more of that frontline workforce in maybe organizations who are really focusing on this particular business driver, you may well be devolving quite a lot of activity to your people managers. So how are you really empowering them to give the best experience for their employees to then also make sure that translates to that positive guest experience? So there's consideration questions around all of those things. How do you measure employee experience, and do you then directly correlate to that customer experience, for example, because there might be that red thread narrative. How do you segment your workforce around personas? Lots and lots of things in there. But there's just sort of 2 or 3 considerations. There's many more on our blog as well.
There certainly are. And if you want to find out more about the actual 10 traits themselves, we've got a framework for that. And if you reach out to either Emma or Debbie Mitchell, who was on our team, she's been on a couple of the live streams before. We've got a lot of information, and we've got a model almost that you can use to apply that to your own business. So if you're watching this and you're interested in it, reach out to one of the guys. We'd be more than happy to share some of the details with you as well. But let's move on to that third business driver, which is all around productivity. So again, repeating the format, if you could just talk to us a little bit around the business driver itself, the CPO hat that needs to be worn, and then which of those 10 traits, I like the word you used, are dialed up a little bit more.
Yes. Yeah, because people listening to this live stream now and then reading some of our materials might say, but productivity is also important to us. All of these drivers that you're talking about are important. And that's probably true. But I guess it's a case of trying to really figure out which one is the main overarching kind of driver, and therefore where you might focus on some of these things. So for productivity, this might be an organization, for example, that's higher volume, lower margin type sector. So really focusing on truly value add activities, because you might have a leaner HR function, for example. And also that constant pressure to respond to the market context, to do things well, do them once. And therefore avoid that repetition, duplication, and effectively wasting time on things that don't really drive bottom line impact. So the CPO hat is dialing up more, again, they're all important, but dialing up perhaps more of that service expert piece. So really focusing on how you can optimize self-service, if you've got that in place, and if you don't, how do you put that in place for people? Also potentially automating where it makes sense, using artificial intelligence as well. And then potentially using strategic partners, perhaps more, again, to help you get, maybe if it's high volume activity, you might decide to outsource that. And therefore you retain your focus from an HR standpoint and your HR teams on the things that really do drive value, for example. So some of the traits here around, again, continuous improvement obsessed, because you want to continuously improve what you're doing to, enable bottom line transformation, and therefore freeing up capacity to focus on the things that really you want to focus on. Using data, so digital and insights mindsets to help you do that, and clearly being digitally enabled and artificially intelligent, but not to the extent of, I think, impacting the employee experience. So balancing that, again, with that personal impact. And then also the supercharged people managers. So I briefly mentioned that in our second scenario around customer intimacy. But in this particular context, if you're trying to really focus on HR doing the core things that it really needs to drive productivity, you might make a strategic decision to actually devolve a lot to people managers again. So, performance management and other things. But then I guess the flip side of that is, from a consideration question, how do you make sure that you've got the right governance and oversight so that every people manager is doing things consistently with their teams if you're devolving a lot of activity to them, so that you don't get differences and you don't get sort of potential negative impact to experience. And there's lots of other things around, maybe do you move to global business services, perhaps from a kind of shared service side, embracing artificial intelligence, lots of things that we could talk about. We don't have time though.
No, we certainly don't. We're going to get to the final driver in just a second, but just as a heads up to those of you that are watching this live stream, we will also be doing a series of podcasts around each of the different drivers. So what we're looking to do is get a few CPOs or CHROs along to just get their kind of take on each of those business drivers, so that you can get a practitioner's view, as well as the wonderful Emma's view and Lacey's view on these different drivers and the impact that they have. So let's move on to that fourth and final business driver, which is around rapid growth. So talk to me a bit around rapid growth, again, using the three situations, or the three different elements of this business driver.
So with this particular context, when we were thinking about organizations that might fit into this bucket, there's kind of two different sets, I guess. So you might have a smaller organization, like a startup, that is looking to expand into a new sector, or might have a new geography they're expanding into, but wants to grow rapidly. So they will have a different current HR operating model to a more established business, But with a more established business, perhaps you've got a business that's got some PE, private equity investment, and is looking to really expedite its growth. So they're the two contexts, I guess, sort of more of a startup and then an investment-backed organization that's looking to grow rapidly. And there are two hats here. So every other one so far, I've said one. In this one, because of those two different organizational maturity levels, I guess, in terms of their HR structure, you've got the transformation enabler, CPO hat. So that's all around, again, the strategic workforce planning, change, talent demand, capability development that we've talked about previously, but also then the compliance champion hat, which we haven't mentioned so far. It's important in all contexts, but particularly in this one, because you want to make sure that going through that rapid growth, particularly maybe as a startup, that you're making sure that you are managing people-related risks appropriately and that you're remaining compliant as you go through that rapid growth and that rapid transformation. So some of the traits that maybe you might want to dial up and focus on more in those contexts around rapid growth could be, again, that business alignment piece from a strategic side, being commercially driven. Again, very, very important. And then the supercharged people manager. There's probably 3 or 4 different traits. I've mentioned some of them there. Thinking about then established businesses, this is around talent demand in particular, thinking about those kind of capabilities. And then, for example, some of the questions that you might want to be reflecting on could be things such as, how repeatable and scalable is our process intake approach? So as we grow and as we want to do more things, how best can we do that? And how do we roll out new services very quickly and make that scalable and repeatable? Also, we've talked about strategic workforce planning, talent acquisition from a talent demand standpoint, and then thinking sure about compliance and again, thinking around productivity in this growth piece. Do you want to outsource? So how can you maybe use third parties or strategic partners in a scalable way to help you grow cost effectively and quickly? And the other thing I will just briefly mention is there's one small thing, which is across all of those 4 business contexts, there's also the broader considerations around workforce demographics. So, you might have a frontline workforce, you might have a highly corporate workforce or a mix. Geographic complexity is also important in those business contexts. Again, that's very, organization to organization specific. And then also, finally, another consideration would be the geopolitical environment. So politics, legislation, regulation, which may be more important for some sectors than others, but it all comes down to that context. So the strategic drivers, and then those other 3 sort of areas that I've briefly just mentioned there to impact on what your solution is.
Yeah, brilliant. So if you want to find out more about, hopefully you found that quite interesting. If you've got any questions, then please feel free to reach out to Emma, myself, or any of the Lace team. If you see at the bottom of this screen, there's a live ticker which is going across. If you go to the lacepartners.co.uk/insights section of our website, you can find the CPO Hats blog. You can find all of our different materials and our thought leadership and white papers around the actual demystifying the HR operating model campaign. And you can also find some more information about some of those 10 traits as well. But from myself, from Emma, thank you very much for checking in with us on our latest live stream, and hopefully we'll catch you next time. So bye-bye.